All right, continuing on with our book study of the Fundamental Five, we come to my favorite chapter, Frequent Small Group Purposeful Talk About the Learning. We all have those moments while we're teaching where we can basically say we see two types of students in our classroom. Those students who catch on to the concept that we're trying to teach, and those students who are struggling with the concept we are trying to teach. In this chapter, we read about how frequent small group purposeful talk can help not only the struggling learner, but also help those students who understand the concepts that we are teaching. Let's talk about the student who is just not getting the concept that you're trying to teach for a moment. Unfortunately, if they're struggling with the learning, they may actually be listening to your lesson such as this. Yet, have you ever noticed that these same struggling students, when given the opportunity to talk to other students in their class about the concept you're teaching, they seem to have a better understanding from a peer than they did from you? So what is this frequent small group purposeful talk about learning? It's basically a practice where after every 10 to 15 minutes of teacher discussion, or at a completion of some type of instructional task, you basically ask a question to the students. Now, of course, the question has to relate to the instruction, and usually after you ask the question, the conversation the students have with each other lasts no more than 30 seconds or up to 3 minutes. Okay, there's some key points when doing the frequent small group purposeful talk about learning. One rule of thumb is to provide student discussion every 10 to 15 minutes. So in other words, when you are discussing or delivering your content in your classroom, 10 to 15 minutes, stop and ask a question. Of course, when you ask your question, make sure your group size is between 2 and 4 students. 2 students, because it takes 2 to have a conversation, and no more than 4, because it's been seen that if you have around 5 or more, actually, that some students will not take part in the conversation. So keep it as small group as possible, between 2 and 4. Of course, also the seed question is usually a good time. It's a pre-planned question when you're going over, okay, this is what I need to teach, the type of questions you want to ask. And these questions are used to guide a student's conversation towards your learning outcome. And it also is good to use seed questions to make sure, of course, students are staying close to the content that you're teaching, and kind of helps you to see if there's a general understanding of the classroom on what you're teaching. And of course, we just talked about it not too long ago, but being in the power zone is a definite help when using frequent small group talk. By doing so, the teacher is in the best position to ensure that students remain focused and on task at hand. That's a definite. But also, while you're listening to the students talk, you may come up to see some type of connections that a group made, and you can stop the discussion and share it with the class. Or you may see a misunderstanding that a group or an individual student is having during their discussion, and you can stop the discussion and share it with your class. It's immediately, or maybe when you start up your talk again for the next 10 or 15 minutes, you can catch those type of things immediately. And of course, last, just remember that when you start this off at first, it's going to be messy. And you know what? It's okay if you fail it the first time. A lot of students don't have that basic knowledge of how to have a conversation that's more social than it is driving toward a learning outcome. They just don't have that experience. But the more and more you do it, the better that you'll get at it, and also the better that your students will get at it as well. Okay, another key component to the frequent small group purposeful talk is the attention span of our students. As you read in the book that Sean King mentioned, students who are under 12 years old have a really hard time, and of course, This is nothing new, of basically keeping the attention on a certain topic, or for us, on our lessons. In fact, when doing his research, he found out that a lot of people learn best, they saw, usually at the beginning of something, let's say right here, and then toward the middle of their lesson or whatever the topic is, and this is an average adult too, not so much, but then at the end, they also learn or remember things from that lesson. This is the same thing with our classroom and with our students. If you'll notice, this is kind of like a typical classroom lesson. To start at the beginning of the lesson, students can basically remember a lot of things that we talk about. Then we're going through our lesson and we're teaching right away, and they have a hard time remembering things in the middle of our lesson. But then as we're kind of wrapping things up toward the end, they don't have a problem or remembering things there toward the end. So at the beginning and at the end. But what if we could help, because of the frequent small group purposeful talk, if we could help the attention span of our students, and maybe even Mr. Ogg if he's in there, but follow the red line here. Say we have the beginning of the class, and we start teaching 10 to 15 minutes, but we ask a question. And then 10 or 15 minutes of working with the students, and then ask another question, and so on and so forth, till we come at the end. Now, if you look at the red line, you are basically stopping and asking questions, and you're getting the attention of the students again. The questions, if you pre-plan them right, could be helpful, but also allowing them to talk to their other peers and hearing it in what we would say, or what Sean Kane says in student language, can also be very helpful. So with following the blue line, that's kind of the old way, or still sometimes we do it when we teach, but students are going to remember at the end, or excuse me, at the beginning and the end, and a little bit less in the middle. But if we throw in our questions at the right time, pre-planned questions, and the discussion is on topic, we can kind of help the attention span with our students. Okay, so wrapping it all up or putting it all together, just remember a couple of things. Number one, planning. This is going to be kind of new to some students. Again, they've never had conversations where it's more on the academic side. It's been more, or at least always, on the social side. So this is kind of going to be new to students, so it could be messy a little bit when you start off with it. And also when you're planning, think about your questions. Another good way, and if you read the chapter, you will see that Sean Kane mentions that you can increase the rigor of your lessons by the type of questions you ask. So this would be a good way when you know, okay, I'm teaching this lesson. These are some higher level questions that I can think of or come up with. And hey, if you need help with some, try and find those high level questions, ask me, Miss Gillespie. Or hey, even go on to Pinterest or Twitter. You can find great type of questions that are higher level to ask in your classroom. It's also going to try and be new for some of us, but the stop and talk rhythm, I know would be difficult for me, because once I was in that zone of teaching, I just kept on going. But you got to get in that rhythm where you're stopping every 10 to 15 minutes, and then for 30 seconds to 3 minutes, you're talking about a seed question that you gave to the students over that lesson that you taught. So you just kind of, Sean Kane talks about using a timer in the classroom. Of course, remember the group size, 2 students, no more than 4. And of course, again, like I just said, the frequency. After you do 10 to 15 minutes of teaching, you got to stop and ask a question. Of course, when you ask that question, just don't ask a question and go to your seat. Get out there in that power zone. Get out there amongst the students. That way you can see if they're understanding the lesson or the question that you gave them. And if they don't, you can stop it or bring it up after the discussion. Or maybe a student made a new connection with it, and you can share that with the class also as well. Okay, now we talked a lot about to help my buddy over here who's just struggling with a lesson on helping him. But guess what? This frequent small group purposeful talk can help those students who do understand it. Think of it this way, because you're giving them time to talk to another student who may not get it. And we always say, what's the best way a student can learn? Is that for them to teach another student. So this is a good way to put whatever concept you're teaching, and for these types of students to make it concrete with them, and for these type of students who are struggling, for them to have a better understanding of what you're trying to teach. Well, that's going to wrap it up. I hope that you enjoyed reading that chapter. If not, please do so. Just a reminder that Sean Kane will be talking to us on August 13th. If you have any questions, let me know how it goes with your frequent small group purposeful talk about learning during your class this coming year.